Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. So, later today, the 2024 Summer Olympics will be starting in Paris, and here at the library we're all super duper psyched about it, even those of us like myself who are generally not big sporting fans. I don't know what it is about the Olympics, but there's just something so engaging about all of the pomp and the ceremony about it. In any case, we are going to be celebrating today with two recommendations, both of which are really, really engrossing documentaries about two very different Summer Olympic sports that don't happen to get as much screen time as, say, some of the bigger events, but I think part of what makes these so engrossing is that they definitely gives us a glimpse into the world of those sports athletes that we don't, again, get to see as much. So yeah, as always, these two recommendations are available to you entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the recs. Okay, before we get started, both of today's recommendations are available via both our Hoopla and our Canopy service, which is great. That means regardless of which you prefer, you'll be able to easily access these two documentaries as well as hundreds of other options. With that, our first recommendation is 2014's Topspin. I think most people are at least vaguely familiar with the sport of ping pong. That said, it is definitely, I think, not one of the big attractions for us at the Olympics. Here in the States, I think most of us relate to ping pong as sort of this thing you played with your family in the basement. But when you look at competitive ping pong, it really is kind of fascinating. It is also incredible to watch the athleticism of these people. I've watched ping pong matches on the Olympics in the past, and it is really impressive how fast everyone's reflexes are. But beyond this sort of very vague familiarity, I didn't really know a whole lot about this sport. I certainly didn't know how people trained for it, how people became part of the team. No familiarity with that whatsoever. So Topspin was a really, really great kind of way to dive in and to really get an in-depth view and an insider's view. So in Topspin, we actually follow three people who are hoping to become part of the 2012 Summer Olympic team. These three young Americans, they're just teenagers, but they're all already at the top of their game. You've got Ariel Singh, Michael Landers, and Lily Zhang. Zhang is actually still part of the Olympic team. She is on the team for 2024. So definitely, if you get the chance to watch this, make sure you're also watching the Olympics. I know I'm going to be tuning in to watch just because I just think this is super cool. So we get to follow each of these three individuals as they're sort of training, the approach to the game. We get to meet the people in their lives, from their families to their coaches, and we get to hear from them what they're going through as they try and position themselves for the Olympic team. Again, as someone who had like next to no familiarity and certainly no sort of inside view of the sport, this was such a cool thing to really get to see how you build an Olympic team of any kind, but certainly for this sport that really doesn't get as much airtime and certainly isn't talked about as much as, say, like your biggies. We get a lot of screen time with like gymnastics. We get a lot of screen time with like volleyball, but I mean, really, truly, I don't know that if I weren't looking for a ping pong match, I would be able to find it, One of the other really cool things about this is it just gives you a really good idea of how ridiculously challenging ping pong can be as a sport in general. Again, the vast majority of my familiarity with this was playing ping pong with like relatives in my family's basement, and certainly not with the dexterity that these kids are going at. I mean, you can lob the ball back and forth. It's like a very family-friendly kind of sport, right? But then I just want to make sure I get this number right. There are often times when this teeny tiny, very light, hollow ball goes up to 80 miles per hour. The kind of reflexes you'd need to be able to see this teeny tiny ball flying through the air at 80 miles an hour, to be able to get the paddle to where it needs to go and then accurately direct it the other direction. I can't even fathom that. I honestly I don't even understand. I legitimately cannot fathom that kind of physical dexterity and ability. So that's really kind of cool to get those little tidbits and to watch it happening on screen. Again, I've seen a couple of matches, but beyond just being sort of amazed, I really didn't know any of the statistics, and that's really awesome to come by. Um, the other thing that's really cool, besides, getting the sort of insider's viewpoint, is just sort of hearing how the mentality has to be when you're aiming for an Olympic team. Obviously, you have to be super competitive. You have to be really on your A game. But just seeing like all of the differences between and the nuanced differences between these three, because there are like each of them clearly is an exceptional athlete, but they all approach things just a little bit differently. And I really liked seeing how, you know, these very different viewpoints can still build a phenomenal athlete. And I think it worked more effectively with this in a sport that like I didn't have any familiarity really for the most part with than it would have with something that I watched a lot, And there's just something very cool about being given a glimpse inside, I think, that makes Topspin so incredibly effective. Now, if you are interested in a film that is sort of based on a true story but is more fictional, there is a Korean movie called As One that follows the year that the Korean ping pong team joined both North and South Korea together into one team. And that's really excellent. It is available on DVD via our CleveNet service, but not streaming, but I would still recommend it. But otherwise, 100%. If you are interested in ping pong, if you are not interested in ping pong, but just want something really fascinating about a sport you might not know a lot about, 100%, please check out Topspin. Wonderful documentary and a definite must watch. Okay, my other recommendation for today is tonally unbelievably different from Topspin, but absolutely engrossing, and that is 2017's Over the Limit. Before we get into it, let me just preface this by saying Over the Limit I find a very difficult watch. I think it is an incredible documentary, but I think there are some really raw moments, so just be forewarned about that. Over the Limit follows the elite Russian rhythmic gymnast Rita Mamun at what ends up being her last Olympics. She has had a brilliant career, and at this point it's sort of like, is she going to win? What is going to happen? Is the culmination of all of this training going to be worth it? How does she become the athlete that she needs to be? And what's really interesting about this documentary is it 100% feels very much like a film instead of an actual documentary. In part because they don't do like much breaking of the fourth wall. There aren't like individual interviews and things like that. It really feels like a series of these captured, very private moments. Like I said, super raw. Like the people on film aren't holding back. And I think that's part of what makes this so real and so organic, because they clearly are not repressing anything, because some of the stuff that flies out of people's mouths I am astonished by. And I think that's one of the things that I found most fascinating about this documentary. As someone who is absolutely not an athlete, who's about as far from an athlete as you could get, so I don't know if that's part of why my reaction was so strong to this or what, but I have never thought so many times in such a short span of time, how is this permissible? How far is too far? Is this how it always is? I mean, on some level, I understand when you're training someone to be an Olympiad, obviously you're not going to be like a fluffy bunny, right? Like that's just probably not how that works. But there's some things that fly out of these coaches' mouths that I am astonished by. Like just as a human being, I'm astonished by. Let alone things you say to someone who's in your care, essentially. And I don't know that like there's a direct like corollary between how far is too far. Is this an effective way to coach someone? Because very clearly the coaches in this get results because so many of their trainees become really successful Olympiads. Obviously Mamoon, incredible career. But how far is too far? Um and I am honestly curious, like other people who watch this, when you watch it, do you have as visceral a reaction? Because there were moments when I honestly paused it and had to walk away because it was just so. I struggle to find a word more effective than infuriating, because really you feel for this girl who clearly is working as hard as she can. Um, so I don't know. Again, like, I don't know if that's coming from a place as someone who is not in any way part of the athletic world, or if it's just like, this really is kind of questionable as to whether it's okay or not. And what's fascinating, after I watched this, I went and was looking up Mamoon, her coaches, how successful her coaches have been. And again, you can't argue about efficacy, but at the same time, like ethically, where are we? Um, but yeah, I was super caught up in this. Like more so than I have been in a lot of documentaries I've watched recently. And again, not a sporty person, nor am I like usually someone drawn to like gymnastics as an event or anything. And whether we're talking about your more traditional gymnastics or the rhythmic gymnastics, those aren't events where I'm definitely like glued to. But something about the way that this is filmed, the way it is presented, you feel so much empathy for all of the trainees that it's just hard not to be affected by the things happening. Um, if you are interested in sort of a behind the scenes view, and I think a really honest one, because again, they did not sugarcoat anything, I definitely think that you should check it out. There, I do offer that bit of a trigger warning. It is super raw and it is super intense in a lot of places, but I think it's absolutely worth watching just because, again, it gives you a glimpse into what a training regime can be like and how much these athletes and very young people like it. That's what really gets me, is when you think about, while Mamoon is at the sort of twilight of her career, the culmination of everything, so many of these young women are so young. And to be put through those paces, it is definitely, it does draw a visceral reaction. So yeah, definitely a fascinating documentary. No narration, just a whole lot of sort of captured images, and I think a really effective way look at this particular training system. So yeah, 100% must watch. Okay, so those are my 2 recommendations for today. If you have any other documentaries about the Olympics that you recommend, pop those in the comments below. If you have any themes you'd like to see us look at in the future, definitely share those. Always looking for help with that. Next week, I will be back with fictional Olympic films that I'm hoping will also garner people's attention, because I do know not everybody loves documentaries, but I hope that you do check out this week's. They are both really fantastic and absolutely worth the watch. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye-bye.